Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our GMAT Quant Refresher webinar. I am sure that you're all very excited to have a bit of math on this Wednesday evening, right? Yes, I know. So my hat off goes off to you that you are actually thinking about the GMAT this time of the year and this time of the day. I love the GMAT. That's my job. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit later, but I want to make sure that this is going to be a worthwhile seminar for you. I hear a lot of feedback from our students who come to these seminars. They say sometimes this was like the most fun webinar they've seen in the past however many years, and sometimes they'll say, well, I learned more in 2 hours than I learned in 2 months researching the internet. So hopefully this is going to be a lot of value for you. I'll let you be the judge at the end of the seminar, but I want to make sure that you really get the most out of the seminar. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, participating actively. So today we have a lot of people. We have over 100 people today in the webinar, and that's why just for everybody's peace of mind, we're not going to have you on a web camera. And if you'd like to send a message, you can use the chat box, and I will be seeing all of your messages. You won't be able to see each other's messages, just in case, because there are a lot of people, sometimes we have some weird comments. So I will be seeing all of your comments, not to worry. So that also means there are no stupid questions. If I see a question that I think somebody might be a little, hesitating whether it's a very smart question, I'm not going to say the name. And generally, I won't. You can also use the Q&A box in case there is a question that you wish we answered at some point, but it's not something that you really want us to address right away. How's that? Can you please type in the chat box whether you can hear me well? And that will mean that we can actually get started. Just give me a thumbs up or yes. Okay, perfect. I see a lot of yeses. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get you a bit outside of a comfort zone. And you probably know what is a comfort zone. And you probably also know that when you stay within the comfort zone, nothing really happens. I mean, we're totally comfortable, so we don't have any reason to learn anything. And that's why sometimes we get stuck in a rut. So if whatever I'm going to do today, or whichever I'm going to give you today, whichever exercises, if they feel slightly uncomfortable, all this means is that you're learning. So you're going to be in what we call a learning zone. Now, if this has been such a long time ago that you barely remember how to add 2 numbers without a calculator, you might be in a panic zone, and that's totally okay. Not to worry, please stay with us. We're going to break things down step by step for every exercise that we're going to do. But try to do your best. Grab that pen and paper, take your notes, and do the exercises. My goal today is to show you what the GMAT Quant is all about, teach you a few strategies that are going to be very useful. Most importantly, teach you how to understand the quant questions, because obviously I can't teach you the entire GMAT Quant in 2 hours. That's impossible. Our course is 6 weeks long, and even then you'll feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. But I want to at least give you that framework of how to think about this test, how to think about these kinds of strategies, so that perhaps the journey forward is going to be a lot easier for you. I'm also going to talk about how to prepare for the GMAT and what kinds of resources you can use. There are not really too many possible options. There are a lot of resources, but only about 3 options to study. And we'll talk about these 3 options and how to decide which one's right for you. Most importantly, how to structure your studies, because even you might be coming to study with a private tutor or taking a class, you still need a structure. So I'll tell you what that structure is. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Grab that pen and paper. Please do not use calculators or Google to answer this question. Here's the first exercise that I wanted us to do. Fairly simple question. It simply asks us to add 3 numbers, find the answer. The answer is also presented as an exponent. And I really appreciate that you've answered the questions of where you're from and how much studies have you done. Certainly helps me to understand you a little bit better as well. I'm going to launch this quick poll just so that when you think you know what the answer is, just please answer and hit submit, and I will know that we can move forward. So there you go. You have about 30 seconds for this question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it has been close to a minute. What I'd like to do is actually show you what everybody voted for. So here you go. If you are able to choose an answer in a poll, that's great. If you're not, please use the chat box. So here's what we've actually selected. As you could see, B and D are tied for the most popular answer, and C is the second most popular. Let's actually see what is the correct answer. And the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, C. It is actually C. And it's C not because C stands for correct, but it's C because the math just works out for this to be a C. Let me ask you this question. By the way, if you got C, congratulations. And if you didn't get C, congratulations, because you're about to learn something really valuable. And there are going to be a few things that we're going to learn here. But one thing that I wanted you to draw from this question is this. In order to answer this question, we need to know a few things. First of all, we need to know what is that exponent. This question is obviously dealing with exponents. So an exponent is a number multiplied onto itself, however many times the power shows us. So 3 to the power of 3, that means 3 multiplied onto itself 3 times. And just for the record, that is 27, not 9. So that's 27. And then 2 to the power of 2, of course, that is 2 times 2, that is 4. 1 to the power of 1 is simply 1. If you were to add these 3 numbers, 27, 4, and 1, you are going to get 32. So the answer is 32. But if you remember the answer choices, you probably remember 32 was not among the answer choices. The powers of 2 were among the answer choices. So it looks like we might have to do one more thing, which is find out what power of 2 is 32. And there are a couple of ways of doing this. We can either just multiply 2 onto itself until we get to 32 and count how many of the 2's we have, or maybe even memorize the powers of 2. And it's really helpful because it saves a ton of time on the test. So if you want to write in your notebook, what should you memorize? One of these things would be all powers of 2 from 2 to the power of 0, all the way to 2 to the power of 10. Somebody's asking whether you should also memorize the cubes. Well, ideally with the cubes, you definitely want to remember the cubes up to 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whether you want to memorize cubes of 7, 8, 9, and 10, there's probably a lot of diminishing returns. It's very unlikely you're going to need them. But if you want to remember them, then you certainly could. But as a minimum, you should know up to 6 to the power of 3. So knowing what's an exponent is important. It's also important, or was important for this question, to know how to add and multiply. Please keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, you are not given a calculator on the GMAT, not on the quantitative section on the GMAT. So the GMAT cannot expect you to be a human calculator. No, you cannot bring your own calculator, and no, you cannot use a computer function of a calculator. This is blocked. So you can only use pen and paper or the scratch pad. So you do need to do calculations essentially on paper or in your head. That means that calculation can't really be too difficult. So this is it, ladies and gentlemen. In order to answer this question, all we needed to do is know how to add and multiply, what's an exponent, and actually do the basic math operations. So if you're wondering, well, okay, geez, then I guess the GMAT is just a test of math. then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what this test really is. But if you're worried about your knowledge of math, I just want to give you a bit of a peace of mind. And that is, you do not need to be an expert in math. In fact, if you've successfully graduated from elementary school, you're pretty much set for the GMAT in terms of the basic theory. Because the theory tested in the GMAT is primarily from elementary school. There's a very small number of concepts from high school, and by very small, I mean probably 10% of questions would be dealing with concepts from high school. And the other 90% would be dealing with concepts from the elementary school. In fact, my 6-year-old daughter, who just graduated from senior kindergarten, she's going to go to grade 1 next year, she's already learned some concepts, such as, for example, the digit theory and how the digits work, and what's the units digit and what's the tens digit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is tested on the GMAT. So obviously, you may have learned this when you were 5 or 6 years old. That means a really long time ago. But it's not complicated. So you might wonder then, well, okay, so can I maybe just give the GMAT to my 6-year-old and she's going to be able to do it? Let me show you another GMAT question, which is probably much more likely to show up on the GMAT. This was just a bit of a demonstration, but believe it or not, this question as it is will probably not show up on the GMAT. It's a bit too simple and a bit too straightforward. All we need is to simply know the basic theory and know how to add and multiply. That's not really what the GMAT's about. So let me show you another question. And I'm going to give you another maybe minute, maybe even a minute and a half to try to figure out what is the answers to this question. You would notice the question looks almost the same. And again, I would like to remind you to please not use a calculator or Google. Whenever you're ready, please let me know what you think is the answer. You can use your brain and pen and paper. There you go. You have about a minute and a half. Well, time flies when you're having fun. It's been almost 2 minutes, so I'll give you 15 more seconds to choose an answer. Please just guess if you don't know the answer. It doesn't really matter whether you get it right or wrong. It's okay. Certainly here in this class. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and close the poll. And Sam, I'm going to answer your question in just a moment. But what I'd like to do is to actually show you the different ways of dealing with this question. Well, one of the ways is to simply go by what we learned in school. What we'll need to do is simply multiply 14 onto itself 4 times, 15 onto itself 5 times, and 16 onto itself 6 times. And then add up the numbers. You would notice there's a bit of an exponential growth, 38,000, 759,000, 16 million. If you add these numbers up, we are actually going to get a D. So if you got D, congratulations. If you didn't get D, it's okay. We'll break this down and we'll actually do other steps because I haven't given you enough time to do this, assuming that you haven't used the calculator. So we need to do something different. And this is where we're getting a bit more into what the GMAT's all about. We're going to start using a bit of our logical thinking here. We are going to say, well, look, there's no way that I could actually calculate this. So I need to perhaps look for some patterns. I need to see what might happen if. So let's see what would happen if. Let's imagine that we are trying to multiply a couple of big numbers. I'm just going to pick a couple random numbers. So you would notice that these are both 6-digit numbers. And if I were to multiply them, I would start with the digits at the end. The 6 and the 7, they're called units digits. And my 6-year-old has already learned this in senior kindergarten. She hasn't yet quite learned how to do the whole one multiplication, but we actually don't need that because we know that 6 times 7, of course, is 42. And the 4, which is in the 10th digit now, is going to get carried over, which is going to keep carrying things over to the next digit until we actually figure out what the answer is. But the 2 is going to stay where it is. Nothing is going to change the 2. So this is what's called the units digit strategy. The units digit of a product of these numbers, and this works for sum as well. It also works for subtraction, but you have to be a little careful because if you were to subtract 7 from 6, you might need to borrow. So it'll be 16 minus 7 and actually not 6 minus 7. But for multiplication or for addition, if we were 6 plus 7, it will be 13. We know the units digit is going to be 3. So here the units digit is 2. So this is really helpful. This is a huge time-saving strategy. And if you look through the answer choices, you would notice that almost all answer choices have different digits at the end, where 1, 5, 6, 7, and then 5 again. So we'll talk about what would happen if we, for some unlucky reason, actually got a 5 at the end, but hopefully we're going to get 1, 6, or 7. So how are we going to do that? Well, this strategy works for multiplication and addition. And here in front of us, ladies and gentlemen, we just have multiplication and addition. So let's deal with 14 first. Now, 14 to the power of 1, of course, is 14. If I were to multiply it by another 14, there will be 14 times 14. And now if you know that's 196, that's really helpful. I would suggest that you do remember this for the GMAT, that you know all your squares up to at least 20 or 25. But if you don't know that, that's okay, because we all know that 4 times 4 is 16. And therefore, if we have two numbers that both end in a 4, we know their product is going to end in a 6. That's it. So we know 14 square ends in a 6. So now we can just keep going and multiply it by another 4, another number that ends in a 4. So we have a number that ends in a 6 times a number that ends in a 4. 6 times 4 is 24. So we know the units digit of 14 cubed is 4. We have one more 14 to multiply this by. So if we do that, we're going to get the number that ends in a 4, another number that ends in a 4, which is 14. 4 times 4 is 16, 6 at the end. So we know 14 to the power of 4 is going to end in a 6. So that's what we've learned so far. Now, let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. What would be the units digit of 15 to the power of 5? What do you think? Let me know. Yeah, I see a few 5s, of course, because 15 to the power of any positive integer is, of course, always 5. 5 times 5 is 25, right? What about 6? What's about 16 times 16 times 16, 6 times? Yeah, of course. It's going to be 6. 6 times 6 is 36, and it just keeps going. We have some other numbers like this, right? The 10 times 10 is 100, always 0 at the end, and so on. 11 times 11, that's 121. Again, always 1 at the end. So you would notice, ladies and gentlemen, there are some patterns here. Things don't just happen at random, right? And in fact, if the question, instead of asking us 14 to the power of 4, it asks us what's 14 to the power of 1,000, that's very easy to answer. Can somebody tell me, please, what's going to be the units digit of 14 to the power of 1,000? Does anybody know? 14 to the power of 1,000? Yes, it's actually 6. Because you would notice there's a pattern, right? So certain patterns you would need to learn. And if you come to our class, we're going to teach you a lot of patterns on the GMAT. And certain patterns you just have to keep an eye on. Because if you see that 14 square ends in a 6 and 14 cube ends in a 4, 14 to the 4 ends in a 6, you would notice that any essentially odd power of 4 ends in a 4, and any even power of 4 ends in a 6. So 1,000 is even, and therefore 14 to the power of 1,000 is 6. Okay, so going back to our question, we have 14, 15, and 16. We already learned that 14 will end, 14 to 4 to the power of 4 will end in a 6, 15 to the 5 will end in a 5, 16 to the 6 will end in a 6. Remember, this strategy works for addition as well. If you just do basically the long addition, just line the numbers up, you'll realize it's basically the same strategy. So 6 plus 5 plus 6, that's 17. We only care about the last digit. 7 is at the end. So you're absolutely right. A few people messaged me here that D is the answer. Now, I'm glad that Joshua asked this question. I was waiting for somebody to ask this question. What if I have 2 answer choices that end in the same number? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we also got a question here. If we are completely stumped by a question, how do you recommend we answer? You know, do we get penalized for a wrong answer, or is it better to not answer and move on the official exam? So on the official exam, you do have to answer. You cannot leave the question unanswered. So if you don't know what to do, you just have to guess, right? So, I mean, there are some ways to guess an answer, and I'll show you some of the ways to guess an answer. Because even this, technically, is guessing. We have not calculated the answer, but we are actually very confident that this is the answer because this is the only answer choice with a 7 at the end. So obviously, for you to decide to use this strategy, you would need to look through the answer choices and actually notice that the answer choices have different units digits. If you look through the answer choices and all of them have the same units digit, that is probably not a good strategy, right? So you need to think very proactively about what strategy to use. It's a bit of a process. And if you come to a class, we're actually going to take you through this process of how you can think about each question and what to look for. And just a little spoiler, I know some of you already come into our class, looking through the answer choices is going to be almost always a very important step. However, you might also ask this question: what if I got a 5? You know, I kind of looked through the answer choices. I took my chances because almost all of them have different digits, but you know, what if I get a 5? Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's still a way. This doesn't mean it's a bad strategy because there's a very big difference between B and E. I mean, think about this. B is 4 million. E is 200 million. And I think you would agree that it is actually pretty easy to figure out whether the answer is close to 4 million or 200 million, right? In fact, I could have just started with that, right? I could have just said, look, I'm going to just notice something that some people don't notice. In fact, this is probably a way that you might start using when you've done a lot of practice. This is one of the ways we teach in our classes. So we teach you the strategies, but we also teach you how to really see through the test. And for people like myself, who's been doing this for many, many years, this just comes so naturally. And that's why when you come to a class, we can show these things to you. So let me show you what you could have done. You could have also looked through the answer choices and say, well, wait a second. The answer choices are very far apart. There's not a small difference between the answer choices. There's a huge difference. I have a number that's less than 1 million, then I have about 4 million, then I have about 16 million, and then I have 200 million. So I can just estimate the answer, right? Even if I'm off by, like 50%, I'm still going to be good. Like If I find that my answer is about 5 million, I know it's B. Even if it's like 6 or 7 million, it's probably B, right? If it's about 20 million, though, I'm a bit of in trouble. Then I don't know whether it's C or D, but hopefully it's not going to be that, right? So you could have started with that. And one of the things you could have done also is decide how to estimate this number. So how would we estimate this number? Which of these three numbers would you actually try to estimate if you want to do this really quickly? What do you think? Would we start with 14, 15, or 16? If you want to do this real quick, imagine this is the final, essentially yeah. So if this is a final question on the test and you have literally like 30 seconds, you can just look at this and say, yeah, I mean, 16 to the 6th, that's the same as 2 to the 24. Now, I know right now it might sound like rocket science, but trust me, this is not that hard. You study a bit for the GMAT, and we teach this in the very first week of our course, how to do these little tricks. So 16 to the 6th is the same as 2 to the power of 24, 2 to the 10 is 1,000, 2 to the 20 is a million, and 2 to the 4 is 16, so that's about 16 million. Okay, so if it's about 16 million, I know my answer is either C or D. And by the way, if you've done this for a really long time, which is what most of our instructors do, they're just going to look at this and say, I know it's C or D, of course. I mean, the GMAT knows people are going to estimate, so they don't want to make it very easy for you. So I can bet the answer is C and D, and 95% of the time they're right. So if I have only 15 seconds left for this question, I can still do it. But let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. If I went this route and I've estimated the answer to be either C or D, how can I break the tie? I don't want to go back and do any calculations, and I don't really have time to look at these patterns in the units digits. But somehow, I do want to find the answer. I know I'm 50-50 now. I know it's C or D. It's about 16 million or so. So what would I do? Any ideas, any suggestions? Very good point. So Sam is saying, well, wait a second. One of them's even, one of them's odd. Train your eye to look for the differences between the answers that will help you make a decision. By the way, if you come to a verbal refresher class, I'm going to show you some really cool tricks where you can, especially in sentence correction, you can decide very quickly. Sometimes I do the question, I don't even understand what it's saying. But I know how to choose an answer because I'm looking for the differences, and then I look specifically for what has to be right and what has to be wrong. So I know one of these is even, one of them's odd. Well, if I look at the original number, 14's even, 16's even, 15's odd. Even plus even, so 2 plus 2, that's even, that's 4. Plus odd, 1, for example, that has to be odd. I can just try some small numbers, 2 and 1 and 3. So I know an even plus an odd will be an odd number. So the answer has to be D. And that's something I can do literally in about 30 seconds. Notice that I haven't done a lot of math. I have to be comfortable with some basic math, but think about this. Imagine you're a CEO of a company. You kind of need to know if a board's asking you a question at the board meeting, how much money roughly are you going to make next year? You should be able to do a bit of mental math, right? So the math on the GMAT rarely goes beyond mental math. In fact, I'm going to show you some examples of what a difficult question looks like, and also some examples of what some people think the difficult questions look like, but they actually don't, or they're not difficult. So we'll get to this, but as you could see, the GMAT isn't really about math. Somebody's asking whether the recording of this class will be available. Yes, it will be available. The recording will be available for the next 7 days. So if you need to review it, you can just go and watch the recording. We'll send it to you tomorrow morning. And if you want to share it with any of your friends, please feel free as well. So here is a quote from the GMAT, the people who make the test, the organization. And what they say essentially is that it's a different test. I was at the GMAT conference. We actually, believe it or not, as a test prep organization, we're actually very good friends with people who make the test. Even though we help you beat their test, we actually have very good relationships with them. They invite us over every year to go and visit them in the headquarters in Reston, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. I've just been there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they feed us really nice dinner and give us all kinds of gifts and share all kinds of things with us. One of the things that I really enjoy is from a gentleman who designs the algorithm of the GMAT. And one of the things he always keeps talking is how the GMAT as a test is very interesting and somewhat unique. There are a lot of other standardized tests as well, but the GMAT is actually one of the most advanced of them. But there's some other tests that follow somewhat of a similar philosophy. And essentially, this is what's called a psychometric test. So think about this. If I want to evaluate how well, how much do you weigh? Or what's your height? I need a ruler or scales. Or how fast do you run, right? I need some measurements. But if I want to evaluate, let's say, how well do you know, let's say, American history? Well, I'll give you a bunch of questions, maybe 100 questions on American history, and I'll see how many you get right. Whereas the GMAT is not a test of knowing something. It is a test that evaluates how your brain functions. Essentially, it evaluates what the GMAT calls higher order reasoning skills. Because if you think about this, if you've done any research into MBA programs, you would probably notice that people who do an MBA are from all kinds of different backgrounds. There's no really such thing as a traditional background. Some people, I had a science background. I had some people in my class, in my MBA, with mining background, healthcare, banking, consulting, marketing, all kinds of background, right? So you don't need to be an expert in anything specific, but you do need to possess a certain skill set. And essentially, it has to do with your logic and your reasoning skills. If you are able to critically analyze information, make the right decisions under pressure with limited time, then you are a good candidate for the business school. Because the business school is not for everyone. But if you think it is for you, you can actually get ready for the business school by succeeding on the GMAT. In fact, at this conference, there was a very interesting revelation from one of the participants who said that in business schools, usually people, when they go for an MBA, they don't fail courses. Let's just be honest. I mean, you're paying a lot of money, you go to the business school. The school usually wants to make sure you are going to graduate. There's usually a very small number of people in each class who actually don't graduate just because they can't keep up with the workload, and sometimes they just fail the courses. And of this very small number of people, it's almost always the people who didn't do the GMAT because they either got a waiver or maybe they did that other test. So the GMAT is actually valuable for you because it not only demonstrates to the school that you're ready, but it also helps you get ready. Right? And it's very different from most of the other exams, just like we said, because most other exams are focusing on us acquiring knowledge. And if you've done a little bit of studying for the GMAT, if you've done a bit of research, you probably already know this is not a knowledge-based exam. And just want to give you an analogy. I love analogies, so that's how I understand things. I'm going to use this analogy. If you want to learn how to swim, it's not going to be enough to read a book on swimming. I think you pretty much understand this, right? I think that's very easy to understand. So simply reading a book and trying to memorize the formulas is not going to be enough. You'll need to practice a lot, but you also need to learn a lot. And I'll show you the exact process of how you can structure your studies so that you can actually beat the GMAT in 2, 3, 4 months. And I'm actually really glad that you let me be your coach for 2 hours, right? Because everybody needs a coach. And in fact, even Michael Phelps has a coach or had a coach. And by the way, here's my official score report just to show you that I'm somewhat qualified to do this. I've been teaching the GMAT now for 14 years, and I scored 750 on the GMAT, so everything is here for real. And just in case you're wondering, well, Sergey is probably a genius. He got 750, and just for the record, I studied for about 2 weeks. If you want to know exactly how I did it, come to our verbal refresher class. I'll show you the exact step-by-step process of how I did it. It's been a while ago. But honestly, I'm not a genius. I've just been doing this for such a long time. And it took me many years to learn these strategies and get really good at them. And it took me also many years to get really good at teaching it. Yeah, there is a link for the verbal refresher. I'm going to send it to all of you tomorrow. I'm also going to give you a link where you can see a list of all of our classes. All right, so I've been doing this for 14 years. I'm really enjoying it. That's my full-time job. So I guess within 14 years, I kind of learned most of the things. So I'm really glad that you came here and I can share this with you. Now, for me, how I got into this, I got really lucky in school. This was my teacher. This was my math teacher. And honestly, he was like the best teacher I've ever had. He was my teacher in school for 7 years. And I owe most of my logical reasoning skills to this gentleman. And he was challenging us, motivating us. And I went to rocket science university, did 8 years of university, and did my MBA. So I'm really grateful to my teachers. And that's why when people sometimes come to me and say, wow, this was the best class I've taken, or like, you're a really good teacher, I say, well, thank you. I had very good teachers. So if I can pass on their skills, then it just makes me grateful for what they've done to me. And ladies and gentlemen, I love my job. This is for me a full-time job, and this is my retirement. I do have an MBA. I did have a corporate career. I quit that corporate career a few years ago. So now I'm just focusing on this. I love it. I meet so many great people. I get to travel. I get to work with different business schools. We're going to have a guest, one of my good friends, an executive director from the Ivey Business School, who's essentially the head of admissions for the whole Ivey Business School. One of the most competitive business schools in Canada. So I love this. And I love working with you as well because, yeah, thank you. Because somebody's saying, what a great retirement. Thank you. This is one of our students, Daria. She actually I believe she just graduated from the London Business School, Master of Finance. She came to us and said, look, I've just scored 380 on a practice test. I guess I'm toast. And I said, no, Daria, don't worry. You can do it. You can get a score of 700. She said, my deadline is in about 4 months. I said, well, you're going to have to put in some effort, but you can do it. And she was able to, in exactly 3 months, she was able to get a score of 700. She took our course for 6 weeks, studied for 7 more weeks. Beyond the point, I wanted to show you her comments because I think they're really important. She said that I learned how to think outside the box. And when people ask me, what do I really need for my success on the GMAT? I usually say you need 2 things. Number one, you need to be committed. Like Daria was really committed because she has a deadline. And she knew that she wants to start that program really badly. And 2, she kept an open mind. She said, look, I scored 380. So there are obviously things I don't know. I have to learn them. So let me absorb as much as I can. Let me do all the exercises and let me follow the program. And she was able to learn how to think outside the box. She was able to manage her time, her stress. When she went for the test, she was ready. And she also learned how to think on a different level. And she was doing really well in her master's program as well. We call this here at Admit Master, think like a CEO. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit. What does it mean to think like a CEO? Basically, think on a higher level when you're doing the questions. All right, so this is what the test is really all about. It's not so much about math. It is about your analytical and your reasoning skills. That's what it is. The current version of the test has these 4 sections. And in the current version of the test, that is a test that's going to be available until the end of the year, this year, 2023. Only the quantitative and the verbal reasoning sections contribute towards the total score, 200 to 800. In the quantitative reasoning section, the section we're talking about today, there are 2 types of questions, problem solving and data sufficiency. That's what we're talking about today. And in the verbal reason section, that's what we're going to be talking about on August 2nd. You can find the link on our website. I'll send you a link as well. I'll put it in the chat later on. We're going to talk about 3 types of questions: sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. So that's the current version of the test. I'll talk very briefly about the new version of the test as well, just so you know what's coming, and you can decide which one's going to be better for you. But here's what's important. The two sections, quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning, are computer adaptive. That means the test gets either easier or harder as you go. If you answer the questions correctly, the test keeps getting harder. And if you answer the questions incorrectly, the test keeps getting easier. Let me know in the chat box, who would like to walk into a test and say, just give me a bunch of easy questions? Give the hard questions to these other people, let them fail. I want the easy questions so I can answer them correctly. What do you think? Anybody like that on the GMAT? Well, unfortunately, that's not going to work on the GMAT, because the only way for us to get a high score is to get to harder questions. Again, it's an adaptive test. Every question is worth a different weight. So if we answer a bunch of easy questions, the GMAT thinks, well, wait a second, why do we keep giving easy questions to this person? This person obviously knows what she's doing. So I'm going to give this person harder questions. Let me see how she deals with them. That's how it's a fairly efficient test, right? I'm really glad that you like it, Mara, that Mara seems so interesting. So that's why it's so efficient. Within about 3 hours, it gives schools more data than what your entire undergraduate degree gives them. Right? The GMAT is worth more weight in your application than your 4 years of undergraduate GPA, all combined. And this is a 3-hour exam. So how does it do that? It's very accurate in the way that it gives you questions and assessing your performance because of this adaptive nature. In fact, you may have heard the test keeps getting shorter. It used to be 4 hours. Now it's about 3 hours, 7 minutes. It actually will go down to 2 hours and 15 minutes. Algorithm gets perfected over time. So the new test is going to now consist of only 3 sections instead of 4. There's no longer going to be an essay. And instead of integrated reasoning, there will be a new section called data insights. Essentially, integrated reasoning was an intermediate step. So now the GMAT has a complete overhaul, the new scoring, the new sections. However, the questions you're going to see on the new version of the GMAT are almost all the same. You are simply not going to see an essay, you're not going to see sentence correction, and you're not going to see geometry. But you will see all other question types: problem solving, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. Also, the data insight section is going to now contain data sufficiency, as well as all integrated reasoning question types. They're going to be 20 questions right now with the new version of GMAT Focus. The scoring system also changes. All 3 sections will now be adaptive, and all 3 sections will now contribute towards the total score. And some of the questions that actually take a bit less time, such as sentence correction, get removed. So overall, the exam isn't necessarily getting easier, but it is getting shorter. So that's important, right? At least we don't have to be there for such a long time. With the break, the exam will be just 2.5 hours. So when is this going to happen? The official prep is available right now. You can go and buy the GMAT Focus Edition official guides, and they are labeled 2023, 2024. The 2022 was the final version of the old official prep available. Now, again, ladies and gentlemen, the questions in the new edition are pretty much the same as the questions in the old edition, just the new edition doesn't have some questions. So if you have the 2022, you can still use it for the new exam. But if you have the 2023, 2024, you cannot use it for the current version of the exam. So if you're not sure which exam you're going to take, my suggestion, just stick with the 2022. There's no need to buy the 2023, 2024. First of all, it's more expensive. It's thinner, it has a lot fewer questions, and a bunch of questions were removed that are actually still tested on the GMAT. So don't buy the new books unless you know for sure you're going to take the new GMAT Focus. So could you use the GMAT Focus Edition for some questions like reading comprehension? Yes, they are going to be the same. Just the new Focus Edition will not contain sentence correction, will not contain geometry. And there are also a lot fewer data sufficiency questions in the new prep. They basically split the data sufficiency questions among multiple very small study guides. So the registration will be available on August 29th, 2023. This year, you will be able to take the new exam sometime in October. We don't know the exact date, but again, the GMAT needs to work out some kinks sometime in October. You can still take the old exam until sometime early next year. As we already said, if you've been studying for the current version of the test, my advice, take the current version of the test. Because if you're planning to do your MBA, if you're planning to start your MBA in 2024, many business schools will not be accepting the GMAT focus. Most notably, Harvard Business School said that they will accept only the legacy GMAT. Secondly, some of the, like I mentioned, easier questions or quicker questions, especially if you're located in North America, statistically for you, sense correction questions will be easier, they get removed. So you're gonna have harder questions and not really that much more time. Also, data sufficiency questions are generally a bit more conceptual, so you don't need to do as many calculations for data sufficiency. So if you know what you're doing, you're actually gonna be able to do data sufficiency questions a lot quicker than problem solving. You know, most people spend about a minute and a half for problem solving, about 2.5 minutes for, sorry, a minute and a half for data sufficiency, about 2.5 minutes for problem solving. An average is about 2 minutes. In the new version of the exam, data sufficiency gets moved to the data insight section. So all of the questions in quantitative reasoning will be problem solving, and you don't really get more time. I mean, you get 21 questions, 45 minutes, so just slightly over 2 minutes, but all of them will be problem solving. So time management will also be a bit more challenging. Also, ladies and gentlemen, if you really want that 700 plus score, just because you want that 7 in front of your score, you really should do the current version of the test, because in the new version of the test, only 1% of people will get scores above 700. The test will get completely recalibrated. If you feel that you're strong in quant, I would also suggest you do the current version of the test, because in the current version of the test, there's still questions where you could answer the question by simply doing calculations. In the new version of the test, most of these questions are going to be removed. So most of the questions are going to be pure logic-based. There's still going to be numbers, but there's going to be a lot fewer questions where you can do math and still get by. And if you're good in verbal, especially sense correction, you might want to also do the current version of the test. So my advice, and of course, everybody's different, but generally for most people, I would suggest if the GMAT is on top of your mind right now, study for the current version of the test, see how you do. If you want to take a practice test on GMAT focus, you can do that as well. And then you can decide whether to take the current version of the new version. Ladies and gentlemen, I have some really good news for you. If you're planning to take the current version of the test in a test center, which would what we normally recommend, especially if you're located in a place where there is a test center, and if you want to talk to me privately about why I believe the test center exam is a bit better for you, again, they're both equivalent in terms of the content, but in terms of the processes and procedures and policies, I think it's just a bit more peace of mind to go to a test center. Again, we can talk privately if you'd like. Then there's a very special sale. Please keep an eye on your email box tomorrow, because we are going to send you a code that will let you save 25% of the GMAT current version. So it could save you easily, $70, $80. That's available only until July 31st. So we'll send you this code tomorrow morning. You can just go and register until July 31st, as long as you register for a test center exam. Sometime by end of this year, you will be able to actually pay less for your exam. I think that's great. You can still get a score of 700. Right now, about 13% of people get scores above 700. Going forward, there'll be only 1%. Whew. Wow, this was a lot. So I feel like we should go back to math, since this is a quant refresher. So I want to give you a bit more math strategies, then we'll talk about how to study, and then we'll actually talk a bit about the application. Just like I mentioned, One of my good friends is going to come, an executive director from the Ivey Business School. So let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to get a bit of feedback because I've been talking a lot. Please let me know, just really quick, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Let me know, why is the GMAT math hard? Now, what's hard about it? Okay, some people saying it's been a while since I've seen this sort of math. I mean, how do we do math now? I remember, maybe about 10 years ago, when I was kind of fairly early in my GMAT teaching career, I had a student, she worked for a bank as a financial advisor, and she couldn't add 5 and 8. She needed a calculator. I'm like, what are you doing? 5 plus 8 is 13. She's like, oh, I'm not allowed to do this. I work in a bank. I work with people's money. If I need to add 5 and 8, I am going to use a calculator. This is a mandate from the bank, right? So she's been trained to use a calculator for everything. And on the GMAT, she's going to have to do something else. So we might have to retrain our brain a little bit. Yeah, no calculators. That's a huge problem, right? Everybody mentioned, a lot of people here mentioned, and time pressure. Very little time per question. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for answering this. You're absolutely right. So a lot of these, or all of these, are very good reasons why math is hard. Let me show you why math is not hard, or what's not so hard about math, or what some people think is hard about math, which is actually not. So I pulled this from one of the websites. I'm not going to tell you which one, but it is one of the websites that promises to really teach you math. You know, if you go online and you say, well, what's a good math course? And then, oh, this is a good math course, right? And you basically just go through a bunch of formulas, you know, 3 or 6 months or something like this. So here's a question that's presented on this website as essentially a hard GMAT question. You would notice it has a cubic equation. And the question is asking us for this, to find this value, and away you go. And you have 2 minutes. Now, if you're really good in math, you probably remember how to solve cubic equations. It is actually possible to solve cubic equations. If you, like most people, including myself, who is a master of math that I've done a while ago, so I don't remember how to do cubic equations, you would look at this and say, wait a second, there's got to be another way. However, at this specific website that was teaching people the GMAT, this was presented as a GMAT question, as a hard GMAT question, and they were teaching how to deal with cubic equations. And that's why a lot of people really struggle with it, because they're not comfortable. They have never really learned that way in school, or maybe it was a really long time ago. So what we teach in our class is a bit different, which is more about, again, critical thinking. So let me show you how we would deal with this question if we were to think a bit more critically and a bit less about math. By the way, just for full disclosure, this exact question would likely never have showed up on the GMAT, because the GMAT doesn't really test pure cubic equations. Even though there's still a way to deal with this question. I'm going to show you a way, but be careful when you're reading different advice on the websites, because sometimes the questions get misrepresented just to make it look really complicated. But here's what we could do. I mean, if I don't remember how to deal with cubic equations, one of the things I could do is I can actually try out the answers, right? I can just plug in the numbers to the answer choices and see which one gives me a 0. You know, calculate the left side, the x cubed minus blah, 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 and see if that gives me a 0. That's the answer. The question is asking what could be the value. So obviously only one of the answer choices will actually give me a 0. So I can do this, right? And I can start with A and then just keep going. So here's what a lot of people will do if they learn this strategy. They're going to start with A, and they're going to say, sometimes they start with C. You know, we teach different strategies how to work with answer choices, but here specifically, there is no linear dependency. There's no linear pattern in the answer choices. So starting with A is as good as starting with C or D or E. So we're going to start with A. We're going to plug in 4. And we'll realize that if we plug in 4 instead of X, it actually is 0. So guess what? A lot of people are going to choose A, because X is equal to 4 gives me a 0. And that's it. That's the only answer. Now, some people are going to then continue checking the rest of the answers, wasting a lot of time. And some people are going to say, well, the question's asking me what could be the value, so I'm done. And then they're going to move on. And unfortunately, A is not the correct answer. Because what did we do? We forgot to divide by 4. The question was asking us what's the value of 4x. So if I want to test the answers, if I want to take the x, put it there in the equation and just see if I actually get the 0, I need to divide by 4 first. So if I want to test A, I'm actually going to use 1 instead of x. If I want to use C, I'm actually going to use 4 instead of x, right? So we need to remember that. And knowing that, by the way, can help you a lot. In fact, when I saw this question for the first time, I'm like, the answer is C. Of course, that's the only answer that could work here. Somebody's asking, why divide by 4? Because the question was asking, what's the value of 4x? So what's in the answer choices is 4x. So if I want the x, I have to divide it by 4 first. If 4x is equal to 16, then x is equal to 4. Make sense? So again, going back to what we've done. Most people, whether they solve the cubic equation or they plug in the answers, are simply going to treat every answer choice as x. So they'll find the x, and the x will be 4. And they're going to pick A and move on. They'll forget to divide. But the question was asking for 4x. Knowing that, and that's why it's actually super helpful to be in a class with other people, because you'll see the stupid mistakes other people are making. And if you come to our class and don't make these mistakes, then we can point you to the mistakes or let you do the mistakes, because that's how we learn. So the GMAT knows that people forget. The GMAT specifically tests how well you can think logically, whether you pay attention to detail. Obviously, this is not a question in math. This is a question in attention to detail. They want to see if you know what you're doing. They want to see if you're accurate. They want to see whether you can manage your cool and whether you can deal with a seemingly difficult question in 2 minutes and not lose your head. That's what they're really testing. So if I know this, and for me, I've done this for a long time, but again, you can learn this. It doesn't take that long. If I know that most people are going to find X, and it kind of has to be among the answer choices, right? Because if I pick 4, there has to be a trap. So 4 is a trap answer. But the real answer is 4 times 4, which is 16. What I can do is I can simply look through the answer choices and see if I can spot a pair of answers where one's exactly 4 times the other. And this pair is actually 4 and 16. It's the only 2 answer choices where one is exactly 4 times the other. Knowing that, I'm just going to pick 16 and move on. That's what I do. But obviously, I've done this for a long time. And, sometimes this is what you have to do. Whew. Hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to do a couple more questions to again show you. Again, I can't teach you everything today, unfortunately, because of the limited time. But hopefully, you're starting to see what the GMAT's really all about. Now, I wanted to show you now a real question. So this was a made-up question in one of the self-study websites. I want to show you a real question from the official GMAT guide. Here's a question. And now I'm actually going to give you about 1.5 minutes to try to answer this question. I'm just going to ask you, please don't Google the answer, and please don't use a calculator. Just do yourself a favor, try this question the best you can. So there you go. You have about 1.5 minutes. Just use pen and paper and your brain to try to find the answer. About 20 seconds left. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have actually given you the full 2 minutes. Just wanted to be nice today. So let me share the results with you. As you could see, nobody for A, but B, C, E are all popular, and D is a bit more popular. So it looks like maybe D is the right answer, 23. Let's actually see if it actually is. Now, let me ask you this question. Just please let me know in the chat box if at some point while you were doing this question, you had a formula that looked something like this. Let me know. Something along these lines, right? So yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, I see a few yeses. Amazing. Okay, congratulations. This is great. You are a very hard worker. That's a good thing. Maybe not for this question, but you know the basics of this, and this is amazing. Most people don't, right? Sometimes I give this question to my engineering friends, and they're like, in 2 minutes they're gonna write like half a whiteboard, and then they're gonna make a mistake and pick their own answer anyway. But at least all the math makes sense. So yeah. This is the traditional way, the way that the book is going to explain how you do this question. Obviously, you can calculate the number of blue marbles either by adding up the blue marbles in each bag or by taking a third of the total, and they have to be the same. That's the idea, right? By the way, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being so positive. You're welcome. I'm just reading the comments since you can't see them. So let me ask you this question. How hard do you think is this question? What do you think? Let me know. Is it hard? Is it easy? Medium? What do you think? Easy-ish? Medium? Okay, so a few people are saying medium. Yeah. Now, here's something interesting. It is, yeah, medium, but straightforward. Okay, easy. Yeah, some people are easy. Wow, that's good. So let me ask you this question. Unnecessary information? Not quite. So here's something really interesting. If you know what you're doing, this is an easy question. If you don't know what you're doing, it's a hard question. Unfortunately, the difficulty of the question doesn't get measured by just one person. It gets measured by how the majority of people answer the question. So the way the GMAT calibrates the question is this: if many people don't answer it, it's a hard question. If most people answer it, it's an easy question. Right? So that's why they test the number of questions before they use them for scoring. So I also was curious whether this is a hard or an easy question. And okay, so the GMAT's not going to tell us. I mean, they tell us approximately. But I went to one of these websites, I believe it was GMAT Club, and I saw how many people get this question right there. And the GMAT Club will then sort the questions by difficulty. And guess what? Of the entire official guide, this was one of the very few questions that was classified as very hard, right? So it's not easy, it's not medium, it's not hard, it's very hard. Basically, what this means is that, if you allow me to use the analogy, if you are skiing and you see double diamonds, that's experts only. So basically just, yeah, exactly, double black diamond. So don't go there, right? Somebody's asking whether the answer is D. Wait a moment, we're gonna reveal the answer in just a moment. So basically, don't go there, right? Unless you're an expert. It's intimidating. But if we want to work smart instead of working hard, we can probably take things one step at a time. So let me show you how I've done this question the first time I saw it. Here's what we can do. We can say, okay, so let's just deal with this information piece by piece. There's a bit too much information here, so let me just break it down. What I could do is I could calculate the number of blue marbles in each bag. In bag P, I would have 4 blue marbles because 10%, just a little over 10% of 37, it has to be 4. Obviously, I need to have a whole number of marbles. I don't divide the marbles, so it's going to be 4. In bag Q, I'm going to have 66.7. Now, you notice the numbers are not very big. So they are anywhere from 5 to 46. And because they're rounded to the nearest tenths, I can safely say that 66.7 is 2/3. And 50% of 32 is 16. So let me ask you this question, ladies and gentlemen. If I want to work smart, I want to think as I go. Let me ask you this question. What do I already know about the number X, about the number of marbles in bag Q? By just doing this, I already know something. In fact, if I paid a lot of attention as I was reading the question, I could have known that even earlier. But what do I know? Can somebody please tell me in the chat box, what do I know about X? I don't yet know what is X, but I know something about X. What do I know about X? Anybody? So somebody's saying, maybe, okay. So Kevin is saying it has to be divisible by 3. You're absolutely right, because if you want to take 2/3, it has to be divisible by 3. What numbers are not divisible by 3? A is not divisible by 3, D, 23 is not divisible by 3, and 46 is not divisible by 3 as well. So look at this. I've already eliminated 3 answer choices. I'm down to 2. And let me ask you, how many of these do we now need to try? I'm down to 2 answer choices, so I can just try them, right? The way I did this with X, I can just pretend that X is equal to whatever, 12 or 9, doesn't matter, and see if it works. And by the way, if we didn't get this far, what we could have also done is we could have said, well, 37 and 32 is 69. 69 is divisible by 3. If I want to take 1/3 of the total, and 69, the number without bag Q is already divisible by 3, I know the number of marbles in bag Q also has to be divisible by 3. So that also will help me very quickly to eliminate A, D, and E. By the way, if it feels, ladies and gentlemen, that we're going at a bit of a fast pace, don't worry. If you come to our class, we're going to give you some warm-up exercises to do before the class. So when you come to the class, we can actually maintain a very good pace. And of course, we're going to have a lot smaller class, a lot fewer people, so you can ask questions and we can interact. And I'll see you on the webcam and so on. So now I'm down to 2 answer choices. I can honestly, oh, congratulations, somebody got it correctly. Awesome. So what I can do is I can now just try one of them. Let's try C. Somebody saying, let's try C. So, okay, let's try C. So let's imagine X is 12. So if X is 12, 2/3 of X has to be 8. Right? So now I can actually calculate, I have all the numbers. I can calculate the total. I can calculate the total number of marbles, which is going to be 37 plus 32, which is 69 plus 12, which is 81. 4 plus 16 is 20 plus 8, that's 28. So guess what? 28 isn't 1/3 of 81. So 12 doesn't work. And if you don't even want to do the math, you can just say, well, look, 37, 12, and 32 is an odd number. 4, 8, and 16 is even number. I can't have an even number be 1/3 of an odd number. So the answer is not C, it has to be B. That's it. Double diamond. Now let me ask you this question, ladies and gentlemen. How much algebra did we do? This is classified as an algebra question, an algebra linear equation question. How much algebra, and did we actually have a linear equation? Let me ask you even more important question. What's the chance of making a math mistake? When we hire new instructors, which we don't do very often, because our instructors stay with us for a very long time, but sometimes we would have somebody come in and say, well, I've taught the GMAT for a while. We sometimes give them questions. This is one of the questions we give them. They do a bunch of math and then they make a mistake, because if you do so much math, it's so easy to make a mistake. But if I do this little math, what's the chance of me making a mistake? Almost 0. I know the answer is not divided by 3, so it's 9 or 12, and then here you go. I can just try one of them. So, ladies and gentlemen, which approach would you enjoy more? You want to work hard or do you want to work smart? That's a big question. And that's will influence the way you're going to study for the test. And it's also, yeah, absolutely. A few people are saying work smart. And also think about the job of a CEO. What do CEOs do is they make decisions, often good, sometimes bad. And, they get paid a lot, right? Because they want to work smart. They can't just work hard because they'll never become a CEO. In fact, we talk a lot about thinking like a CEO here at Admit Master. I always tell our students in the very first class, when you come for our 6 or 12-week program, I say, look, you'll probably a few years from now forget this formula or the area of a trapezoid or this grammar rule. But I'm hoping you're going to take away some skills that are going to help you become a better decision maker, because that's what the test is about. So let me show you one more question, and then we'll switch gears a little bit, and I'll tell you a bit about how to study for the test. And then we'll talk about the application process as well. So here's a data sufficiency question. If you have never seen a data sufficiency question before, not to worry. Let me explain to you how it's structured. And I'll tell you exactly what you need to do, and then I'll give you about a minute and a half for this question. So you have a passage that essentially explains what's going on. Then you have 2 statements. Now, the passage has some information often and a question. The information in the passage is not enough to answer the question. I'm always missing some information. The missing information is given to me in the additional statements. The question is not, what's the discounted price of the second shirt? The question is, information from which statement do I need in order to be able to answer this question? So you notice the answer choices don't have numbers. They simply ask whether statement 1 will help me answer the question, or statement 2 will help me answer the question, or I need them both, or maybe even both of them are not enough, or maybe either one is sufficient. So here's what you need to do, ladies and gentlemen. First, focus on the question. Read the question, understand what the question is asking, and what information is given. You can think about what's missing, look at the statement, and think about this. If I knew information in statement 1, could I actually answer this question? If the answer is yes, then statement 1 is sufficient. If the answer is no, statement 1 is not sufficient. Then you do the same for the second statement. And if it turns out that none of them is sufficient on its own, then you need to try to use them both. And that will lead you to one of the answers. So there you go. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And I'm certainly happy to explain this again, but I would like to now give you about a minute and a half to work on this question, and let me know which of the statements you believe are sufficient, if any, to answer this question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me stop you right there. Let me go ahead and end the poll. I'm actually going to share with you what we selected. So a few people for A, a few people for B, a lot of people for C, a few people for E as well. And now this is an official question. So if you look at the back of the book, you would notice an explanation. And the way the explanation for this question works is this. Honestly, if I want my stress level to go up, I will read the explanations from the official guy, right? And it'll probably take me 10 minutes to understand it. But if I want to get this question done in a minute and a half on a real test, I probably will do something different because this looks way too complicated. And like I mentioned, I have a master of math. So what I want to do is, instead of thinking the way that most people think in high school, and maybe the way that we did things in high school, I want to think like a CEO. So let's actually think about this as if we are a CEO of the store, we're a manager. Let me ask you this question. How many of you like to buy things at a full price? You walk into a store and say, wow, everything's at full price today. That's amazing. Let me go and buy a bunch of things, right? We don't like that, right? We like to buy things on sale. So here's what, exactly, thank you, yes, negative. So what we like to do is we like to walk into a store and say, wow, big sale today. Buy one, get second one at a discounted price. So here's what the store is actually doing here. They're saying, look, we're gonna make you buy 2 shirts instead of 1. We're gonna make the same amount of money on the sale of 2 shirts as we're going to make on the sale of 1 shirt. So for us, we're basically making no profit on the sale of the second shirt. We're selling it to you at cost. Whatever it costs us to buy, we're just selling it to you at that price. We're making all our money on the first shirt. So normally you would have walked in, bought 1 shirt, we make, a certain number of dollars, and that's it. But chances are you're not gonna buy because there's no sale. But if we make a sale, you're gonna walk in, buy 2 shirts, so you feel like you got a good deal. We actually made the same amount of money. So interesting marketing, right? And for the purpose of this question, what this actually means is that because we're not making any money on the second sale of the second shirt, we are selling this shirt to you at cost. So whatever it costs us to buy it from the warehouse, from the manufacturer, that's how much we're going to charge you. Now, let's see which statement will actually give us enough information to answer the question, what was the discounted price of the second shirt? Statement 1 gives us the full price. I mean, knowing the full price might be interesting. If I walk into a store, like, hey, it was $16. Okay, but I don't know the amount of the discount, the percentage of the discount, or what's the new price. So this is not by itself helpful. So statement 1 on its own will not be sufficient. However, statement 2 tells me that the cost of the shirt to the store was $12. And guess what? That's enough. The question was asking me, what's the discounted price? It never asked me what was the regular price. It never asked me how much money am I making as a store. It simply asked what was the discounted price. And the answer is $12. That's it. So the answer is B. Let's not go beyond what the question is not asking. It's very important to focus on what the question is asking. It's all also B, by the way. It was 9. So this, ladies and gentlemen, of course, requires you to think on your feet and also develop confidence. This is very important. The test is designed to intimidate you. So the way not to be intimidated is to develop this confidence. And I'm actually going to show you how exactly you can follow the process to develop this confidence. But I wanted to show you an example of somebody whom I met just at the start of the pandemic. She lost her job, and it was a really tough time for many people. If you remember 2020, right? It was crazy. Darini, she came to us, and she was recommended by one of her friends. And she said, look, I have a lot of work experience. I'm approaching kind of the upper end of my work experience. So a couple more years and I would be too overqualified for an MBA. But I've meant to do my MBA for a long time. And I always had trouble with the GMAT. And for her, it was so extreme that with her permission, I'm sharing her story. It was so extreme that when she pulled out the GMAT book and tried a few questions, she had to go and get some medication because her stress level was going so high. She had some panic attacks. And she said, look, I mean, you're my only hope, right? I feel like, wow, I'm like Luke Skywalker from the Star Wars. So anyway, we had to develop a special study plan for her. And at that time, we also had, so we get trained, by the way, as instructors, we get trained not just simply in the GMAT, by the GMAT and, by a lot of peer training, but we also get trained by the psychologists that come to Admit Master and they do training for us, how to engage you in a class, how to make sure you stay on top of your studies and everything else. So we actually, that usually happens behind the scenes. We go through a lot of this training. We invest a lot into our instructors. But at that time, we decided we're going to get our trainer to come and actually work directly with our students. He actually worked with Darini here specifically, and we developed this study program for her of how she can keep track of her progress so she can start seeing some results and build up her confidence. And as a result, she was able to get a score of 700, and she actually just graduated from Oxford MBA. She works for the United Nations, and I just met her in London, England recently. She was just so happy that she finally decided to do an MBA. So it's all possible, and it's possible regardless of where you're starting from. So somebody mentioned to me, well, if I have this score, would it be enough for me, a certain amount of time to get to this score? So I'm going to let you know how, I'm not going to say the name, but just for privacy, but I will let you know how to get in touch with me, and we can actually connect, and we can review your study plan. So if you've never taken a practice test, you can go on our website. I'll send this to you tomorrow as well, and you can take a practice test. And you can see where you are. And if you want to know where you want to be or where you should be when you send in your application, then generally my advice is to try to beat the average at the business schools. Here, the average is the top North American business schools from the US and Canada. So as you can see, they're pretty high. Right? For example, an average at top 5 US schools would be above 730. The average on the GMAT, yeah, I know somebody's saying I'm so scared to take a practice test. Honestly, I know this is very hard. It's for me, it's almost like being scared to take a blood test. You don't know what's going to come, but the good news is that you can do it. Anybody can do it. I mean, remember Darini or remember Daria? She got 380. I had a gentleman get 200 in the practice test, and he was able to get almost 700. So the average for European schools is somewhere in the middle. So schools such as INSEAD, Oxford, they'll be somewhere around high 600s, low 700s, something like that. But the GMAT's competitive test, it's a bulk of the exam, and the 700 right now is an 87th percentile. So it means only 13% of people will get scores above 700. Going forward in the new GMAT focus, it's just going to be 1% of people getting scores above 700. So sometimes people ask me, what's the success rate? How many people get 700 scores or more on the GMAT? And my answer is usually depends on how you ask. If you go on the GMAT website, they're going to tell you it's 87th percentile. So it's, 13%. But at one of the GMAT conferences, they actually gave us a real number. And this is a real number. I know it looks a bit shocking. And we were like, wait a second, you're saying it's 87th percentile. How come it's less than 1%? Saying, it depends on how you ask a question, right? So thinking critically. So here's how they look at this. They say, we're going to take a look at everybody, not just who did the GMAT, but everybody who wants to do the GMAT. Because many people who want to do the GMAT will give up and not do the GMAT for many reasons. And I don't know if you looked at some statistics, but an average person with an MBA will make somewhere between $3 to $8 million more over the course of your career than a person without an MBA. And many people are saying, well, MBA is dead. Why should we do an MBA? I was in New York City, and I know some of you, I recognize your names. We met at the MBA tour in New York City. It was packed. totally packed, right? Because people know that if you go to, I'm going to maybe use an extreme example. If you go to Stanford, the average salary 10 years after graduation, when you are, maybe like 37, 38, the average salary is $500,000. That's average. So there's a very clear return on investment. So here's a bit of statistics, a bit of a funnel for the GMAT. Close to 10 million people a year are thinking of doing a master's or an MBA worldwide. I mean, we have a lot of people worldwide, right? So about 10 million people a year are thinking about this. About 2 million people will do something to start preparing for the GMAT. They'll either register on MBA.com or they'll buy a book or download the practice test. 2 million people. Of them, guess how many will do the real test? Just over 5%. And of this 5%, only about 13% of people will get scores of 700 or more. So the chance actually of everybody who wants to, maybe thinking of doing an MBA or a master's, the chance of them to actually get a 700 plus score that will get them to, most of the good business schools, assuming the rest of their profile is good, is about 1 in 600. And in the new exam, it's going to be about 1 in 10,000. So I want to be very honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. This is not going to be easy, because sometimes you go on the website and you see this, YouTube video. Here's how I did my, 760 in 2 weeks, and I got 750 in 2 weeks, and I'm going to tell you exactly how. But I'm also going to tell you that I've learned most of these strategies for many years, so most people can't repeat it. Not because I'm smarter than other people, but because I've actually invested many years in learning this. I had really good teachers, but it took me a really long time. Right? Many people can learn this much quicker. But here's what one of these websites that I mentioned where I took this question from. I'm not going to tell you which website or which course. No product placement from competitors here. But I'm sure if you go on GMAT Club and if you type self-study course, you're actually going to find what that is. Yeah, I'm not going to say it. So if you go on this website, they'll actually tell you our average score is 730. And 92% of people score above 700. Geez, if I do the math, that means more people after your course get above 700 than the total number of people doing the GMAT worldwide. So take some false promises with a huge grain of salt, but also please do know that you can do it. You can get a score of 700. If you have the right structure. Some people ask me, how should I really study for the test? And I'm going to give you the structure in just a moment. But if you structure your studies properly, if you learn the right strategies, and you have the right amount of support, somebody who can tell you what you're doing right and wrong, you're going to study very efficiently, and you can get a score of 700 probably in less than 6 months, regardless of where you're starting from. So it's all doable, and I'll show you exactly how. So let's talk very briefly about the resources. And I see that JD has just joined. So thanks so much, JD. I'll give you the floor in just a few minutes. But I want to talk very briefly about the GMAT resources. We'll talk a little bit more in our verbal refresher class. You probably already remember, we talked about this by now about an hour and a half ago. This is not a knowledge-based test. However, we are creatures of habit. That's how the GMAT gets us. And that's how we can beat the test, by developing new habits. Most of us just say, what books do I need? Because it's a test, right? Test, I need a book. These are really good books. This is a new version of 2022 if you're taking the current version of the GMAT. But please do remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is a question bank. The GMAT does not teach you how to beat the test. The explanations in the GMAT are pure math. But we already said, and especially in the new version of the test, there's going to be fewer and fewer questions you can do with pure math. Even the GMAT now recognizes, well, these explanations are kind of pretty bad, right? Because it's all about logic. So it's not about acquiring knowledge. It is about acquiring a skill. And that's why there's going to be a different process. So please grab that pen and paper and write this down. There's going to be 3 steps to your study. Step number 1. Before you begin studying for the GMAT, you must be comfortable with the basics. I'm going to use an analogy of driving a car, something that we can all relate to. So step 1, be comfortable with the basics. Learn the rules. That's important. You can review the rules from the official guide, If you come to our course, we are actually going to give you an adaptive platform that's used for school students to help them with things such as adding fractions and finding misplaced modifiers and things like that. So you need to be comfortable with the theory. If you walk into our geometry class and you don't know what's a circle, you might have difficulty in the class. Fortunately, we provide free course retakes for 12 months. So if you need to come back to a class and repeat it, you can do it. But ideally, we'd like for you to get a good score as soon as possible, right? So we want to make sure that you get your money and your time's worth. So make sure that you know the theory first. That's what we did when we learned how to drive a car. So that was step one. Step two, when we learned how to drive a car, we actually had to get in the car, right? It's not like you read a book and then said, Mom, Dad, give me the keys. I can just go and drive. No, they'll say, well, you don't know how to drive yet. So what you need is, and somebody has a question about a certain type of books. Yeah, I'm going to tell this to you in a moment. So what you need is you need to develop the skill. And that's why you need to actually start doing it. Now, you can start doing it by either watching YouTube videos, by reading some books. And so any book that has a name of a test prep company on it is the book that's written for a course. Somebody was asking, Kaplan or Manhattan Prep, or, are these good books? Yeah, they're used for their course. So you would read the book, usually do a bit of review, then you come to the class and the instructor is going to show you some of the more advanced strategies. Generally, that's how things work. Also, companies such as Kaplan is actually owned by Washington Post company that's owned by Amazon. So obviously, when you go on Amazon, Amazon is going to try to sell you some books, on the GMAT, because obviously Amazon's making these books, right? Amazon's not just an Amazon; they also own publishing companies, including the one that owns Kaplan and Manhattan Prep. So you need to start doing it. Now, you can start doing it yourself. And this way, you're going to essentially do self-study, whether you study with books or you study with some interactive resources, with some of these self-study courses. We also have a self-study course as well. If you are on a budget, then that's what you're going to be doing. Many people are going to either work with instructor one-on-one, which is time efficient, but could get very expensive. So most of our students will come and take a group class, because in a group class, you first of all can get enough interaction with the instructor. The instructor can show you the good strategies and most importantly, give you feedback. Right? So yes, the group class might be a bigger investment than the self-study, but with the self-study, if you have a question, you can't ask. That's a problem, right? And many of the self-study courses, what they would do is they'll sell you a relatively inexpensive course. Like, for example, this course I mentioned, I think it's like $300 or $400 for 4 months, whatever. But then every hour of private tutoring is $350 US. And if you're in Canada, it's about 500 Canadian dollars per hour, because they know you're going to have questions, right? So when you have questions, let's say if you're in a group class, you can always ask the questions. Secondly, if you are interacting with the instructor, then you can also get feedback from the instructor. The instructor can actually tell you things you might not see yourself, right? Just like that person in the car just said, oh, I've noticed you're developing a bit of a bad habit here. So let's work a bit on your bad habit. So that's very important, right? So think about what kind of a support you need and who can help you, who can kind of give you feedback, be available to answer the questions. And most importantly, make sure that you learn the best strategies up front. This is very important because of step number 3. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, you will have to practice. And if you've heard practice makes perfect, that's actually not true. I'm sorry. Practice helps you develop new habits. The more you practice something, the more it's going to become your habit, regardless of what you do. So if you develop good habits, you're going to do really well on the test. In fact, many of our students will score higher on the real test than they would on a practice test. That's quite common. Some people buckle under pressure and do worse on a real test, and then sometimes they have to redo the test. But many of our students will actually do better. Darini, her highest practice score was 640. On the real test, she got 700. Why? Because she developed habits. And when we are a little stressed out on the day of the test, because it is going to be stressful, you're going to fall back into your habits. And if you have good habits, you're going to do really well. So this is going to be important. That's why practice is going to be important. We generally suggest you allocate somewhere between 10 to 20 hours a week to study for the test. In fact, let me talk really briefly about our program in case you're interested. Then we're going to ask the JD to share lots of useful tips about the MBA applications. So our courses are 6 weeks or 12 weeks in class. 6 weeks, you're taking one class a week. Each class is 4 hours long. 12 weeks, you're taking 6 weeks, 2 classes a week, 12 classes, 12 weeks, 1 class a week. It's a live class. In some cities, it's available in person. In all of the other places, it's available online. We have people anywhere from Africa to the UK. We have a couple of people from the UK right now in our weekend class. We have people from the other side of the world in our evening class. Actually, it's morning for them. So it's a very interactive, it's a live class, about 10 to 15 people in class. Most importantly, we give you everything you need. We're going to continue coaching you and supporting you. It is a class that's a little more affordable than the big classes, but here's the thing. We spend very little money on marketing. We get most of our clients through referrals, through partnerships with business schools, and through seminars just like this. So you know when you are coming to the class, you're getting a lot of value, and you're not really feeding a huge marketing department. Right, and if you go to admitmaster.com/offer, you can see some special offers. Our next class starts in August, and there's going to be a weekend class, and our following class will be in September. Please, again, keep an eye on your email. Tomorrow, we're going to send you these special offers. There are also options available for self-study. There are a couple of options. One is where you're going to be studying with an instructor's help, and another one where you're going to be studying without the instructor's help. So you can go on admitmaster.com/offer. You can see all 3 options. So it's either a group class, studying with an instructor's help yourself, or studying completely without the instructor help. You can try a few things. There are lots of resources available, free practice tests available. You can also even try our self-study course completely free for 7 days. You know, this is a bit of a preview of how our live class is going to work. But please remember, in the live class, we're going to have a lot fewer people, and you're all going to be on webcams. Right, I'm going to be in a classroom. If I teach a class, we have 5 big screen TVs in the class, and we're going to be able to see you and everything that's going on. We have 3 cameras. You're going to see everything that we have in a class, so you're going to have a really good experience. We do keep track of the success of our students. In the current version of the test, about 1/3 of our students get score of 700. Like I mentioned, no false promises, but all I could say is it is possible, and it depends on what you need and how much time you have. Here, Brian got a score of 760 in 6 weeks. He was studying full-time. He just said, look, I'm starting a new job in 2 months. I'm going to be fully dedicated. He followed our program exactly to the T. He did all the homework. And first attempt, 760, 6 weeks. That's it. Even if you're super busy, you can still get a very good score. Here's Fionn. She actually took our course back in 2019. And in the summer of 2020, when the pandemic was raging, she's a nurse. She was working in the emergency room, overnight shifts. She was still able to get 760 by allocating a bit of time, but staying very committed. Like I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, staying committed and keeping an open mind is the 2 most important skills that will help you succeed. Who's super excited? So ladies and gentlemen, if you feel, and JD is going to talk a lot about the MBA experience, so please stay. This is going to be super valuable. What you're going to learn in the next 15 minutes, 20 minutes, like this is gold, pure gold. So if you're super excited, then ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite you to our virtual classes or in-person classes. So I say virtual just because virtual you can take anywhere in the world, but you can even take in person in certain cities. So just go on our website. Our GMAT verbal refresher class is going to be on August 2nd. You can take a practice test at ivey.trygmat.com, and you can find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stay behind, and I'm going to answer all of your questions. Yeah, we do offer an in-person class in Toronto. Absolutely, you could take our class in person in Toronto. There are some questions in the Q&A box. I will get back to them. I will stay here, but for now, I'm going to just ask you a very quick question while we're doing the switch over, and that's decide, ladies and gentlemen, what's next for you? What's really important for you? Is it important? And hopefully JD's tips are going to also serve an inspiration. So please let me know what's next for you, and please help me welcome JD Clark, an Executive Director of Recruitment and Admissions from the Ivey Business School. Thank you, JD. It's so nice seeing you as well.
Yeah, again. Thank you, Sergey. I'm just going to share my screen here and get started. So Thank you for allowing me to join again. It's always a pleasure and always appreciate the opportunity. And so what I'm going to do for everyone that's sticking around is for the next 20 minutes is give you some tips and tricks on applying for an MBA program. And I'm going to use Ivey as an example, but many of the tips and tricks that I share with you today, you can use for any MBA program that you're applying to. And really what this presentation is about, I'm going to start with giving you some advice on how to approach the decision to do an MBA, because it is a large decision, and then share with you elements of the application and give you some tips and tricks to really put your best foot forward. So this is, I won't go into detail about my background or anything else, but you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, learn more about my background, but it's also a great way to stay in touch. And it's also an excellent way to connect, but I also share a lot of articles about Ivey and about MBA programs in general. So I'd be pleased to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm going to talk about how to approach a decision to do an MBA, and it is a huge decision. And I came across this TED Talk probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And as I was watching the talk, I said, wow, this really resonates with the type of work that we do in helping candidates. And here at Ivey, when we work with candidates, we really view this as helping you make a decision, whether it's to attend Ivey or not. It's really about helping you make a decision and adding value to you through this process as you kind of think about, really two things, whether you should do an MBA or not. And then once you decide you want to do one, it's like what format, what type of program that fits best for you. But this video is by Ruth Chang, and Ruth has an interesting story. She's actually did her undergraduate degree in philosophy. Went to law school after that because she's like, what am I going to do with a philosophy degree? Practiced as a lawyer and hated it. Went back and did a PhD in philosophy. And her area of study is around this idea of how to make hard choices. And there are 3 things that I want to talk about that Ruth talked about in her video that I think is really relevant as you approach the decision to do an MBA program. The first thing that she talks about is she talks about what makes a difficult decision. And really it's this quote. And think about a difficult decision, how you define it is anytime you're putting a pros and cons list together. And I can guarantee you as you go through this process of thinking, should I do an MBA or not? Or which MBA program that I should do, you're definitely going to approach it with a pros and cons list. The second thing that she mentions, and I think this is really important, and I can provide tons of examples of when this has impacted me personally. But the second thing is she talks about as humans, when we are faced with a difficult decision, our natural reaction is always to get overwhelmed. And when we get overwhelmed, what happens is we default to the easiest decision, not necessarily the best decision. When you think about that in his MBA program, I know Sergey always shares the stats, the number of people that sign up on MBA.com, the GMAT website, then the numbers that actually go ahead and write the GMAT is a very small number, a portion of that number that sign up to get information on the GMAT. And so the easy decision sometimes is, well, I don't want to do an MBA, is to kind of back off and not do it. And so I'd really encourage you as you think about doing this, a program like this, is that you really do that gut check actually in any difficult decision and realize, am I actually doing the right decision or am I actually defaulting to what that easiest decision can be? The third thing that she talks about is giving you a framework on how to approach a difficult decision. And it really starts with this question of what matters most to you. So I'd really encourage you as you think about doing an MBA program, think about what matters most to you, not just around the curriculum. I can tell you I've worked in several business schools. Curriculum for an MBA is much like medical school or law school or any professional schools, whether it's dentistry. Curriculum's relatively the same across different programs. But the culture and the experience and how learning is done is very, very different, whether it's a small program, a big program, a program in a big city, or a program in a university town or city. So think about those things that outside the classroom is really, really important to you. I'm going to share what matters most to us at Ivey, and it actually comes down to 3 things. The first thing is the education experience that we deliver and, the impact that it has on you. The second thing that we think about is we think about the career management and what do we do to help you career-wise, not just that first job after graduation, but throughout your career, and giving you those tips and tricks and those skill sets to manage your career. And the third thing is the network that you're joining and making sure that that network is supportive of you. And so one of the things that I think is important as you approach this decision, we always get questions about how should I look at rankings? And, my answer is you should look at rankings, but what you need to do is look at the rankings on those aspects of what matters most to you. And, every school, and we can as well, we ranked, consistently #1 in Business Week. And, schools can claim a #1 ranking, but what's more important is these publications go out and they actually survey students as part of the rankings, and getting some of that survey data and looking at what matters most to you, that can be incredibly powerful. So I'll go through the survey data that's important to us. So The Economist goes out and they actually survey students that have recently done the program, and they rank the top 100 schools globally. And out of the survey data, out of these 100 schools that were ranked, we were the top 10 in the world for the education experience for 4 years in a row. Same survey with The Economist, again, survey data of people that have done the program. We were ranked top 20 in the world for student assessment. The worst we've ever done is number 16. So top 20 in the world for student assessment of career services for 5 years in a row. And this one we're really proud of. Business Week did it in 2019. They stopped it in their rankings after that. And of course, they took a pause in rankings around COVID. But one of the things that they did is they actually surveyed alumni, current students, and they actually surveyed recruiters. And they talked about the power of the networking. And out of 131 schools that Business Week kind of gives this score to on networking, we were number 15th and globally. And one of the things I'd encourage you is to really ask tough questions as you kind of go through this process to alumni and people in the program, and talk about the value of the network that they're joining. And that's one of the benefits of doing an MBA program, is gaining access to a new network. We often get questions. I'm going to start with this, is like, who is an Ivey MBA? And, I will say right off the bat, I'm not a big fan of class profiles. And the reason is you can look at a class profile and you go, oh, there's no one really like me. But here's what we're looking for, quite simply. We're looking for tomorrow's leaders. When you think about where tomorrow's leaders come from, or even think about where leaders come from, they come from all different industries, all different backgrounds, both education-wise and work-wise. And so I really, really encourage you, and I'll share with you personally, this matters a lot to me, is I really encourage you never ever to self-select yourself out. Don't self-select yourself out saying I'm not an MBA candidate. Don't self-select yourself out of a particular school. Is you want to make sure that, that diversity is important. And again, sometimes when we get overwhelmed, sometimes we can lose confidence in it. And so I really, really encourage you to never, ever self-select yourself out. That's really important. And our job, we work with candidates, but also, other schools who have individuals that will work with you in the application process and really help you. But again, never self-select yourself out. The reason this is important to me, I have a history degree. I don't have a business background. I come from a business background, and I did an MBA on sort of the older end of our profile. And my only regret is I didn't do it earlier. The reason I didn't do it earlier is I self-selected myself out. So I really think it's important as you approach this that you don't self-select yourself out. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through elements of our application process. Our application process is very similar to other MBA programs. And as we walk through some of the elements of our application process, I'm going to give you some tips around it. First thing we're going to talk about is, many schools will ask for work experience. So a range of work experience in a full-time MBA program tends to be 2 to 10 years. So what are we looking for in that work experience? Give you some advice about references. I'm going to talk about your previous academic experience. And we look at that in combination with a GMAT or GRE. I'm not going to talk a lot about the GMAT or GRE because Sergey covered a lot of it. And then I'm going to close with talking to you about the admissions interview, which many schools do. So work experience, we look for 2 years full-time quality work experience. You're going to find that with many top business schools, is they're going to look for that work experience. And that's really important because it brings diversity in the classroom and it adds value to the classroom and team learning. It's amazing when you teach in our undergraduate program, those are individuals that don't have work experience. And when you teach in that, it's all hypothetical. Well, this is what I think I should do. But when you teach in an MBA program or even an executive MBA program where individuals have work experience, you kind of view it a very bit different because they bring it with the lens of their experiences that they've had already. You're going to find all programs right now that I know of, many of them have an online application. And what an online application does, it's going to ask for your work experience, but very, very sort of briefly. It's going to be an opportunity to say, here's the title, here's the company, here's where I started, the date I started, the date I ended, and here's a couple of bullet points about what my job description is. But many schools are going to ask you either for a letter of introduction or a resume. And what we do at Ivey is we ask you to do a resume and provide that to us. And that's very much about being accomplish oriented. It's talking about the impact that you've had. And so, here is the advice that I have as you think about describing your work experience in an MBA program, is you want to describe it, the impact and accomplishments that you've had. It's less about what you do. What we're interested in is the context of that impact and accomplishments that you are most proud of. So what I'm going to do is share some of examples of that. Where did you show initiative? Your ability to get things done. So think about those projects where I was like, I'm really satisfied. Where you had to figure things out, your self-management. Where you had to bring big picture thinking, maybe thinking about risk, thinking about threats, thinking about opportunities. Teamwork's going to be a huge element that MBA programs are going to look at. And you can look at teamwork of where did you have to accomplish something with other people? You couldn't have accomplished it just with yourself. Think about that, but also think about, where you were supportive as a team member, maybe where you struggled and had to work through it, where you had to persuade and communicate. Think about maybe when you had to sell an idea. Making and assisting decisions. And I put assisting in there on purpose because one time I was doing a presentation like this a few years ago and somebody said, I don't really make decisions. That's not my title. And my question back, that's not really in my purview. That's my boss that makes decisions, or even higher than them. And my question back is, and this person was in an analyst role. And I said, when you produce your reports, are you bringing suggestions forward? No, yeah, all the time. Then you're assisting with decisions. So think about where you have assisted with decisions. The last one's pretty common or evidence. It's where you had to kind of problem solve. So think about those things as you think about the experiences you want to highlight. References. I mean, each school is sort of different in the way that they ask for references. They're different in what they require for references. Here at Ivey, how we do references is they're part of our online application. What you do is you fill out your reference forms and then you execute sending the reference to them. And our reference form is based on them ranking you on certain character and abilities and also answering some open-ended questions. So the next thing is, who do I pick? So for us, we ask for a minimum of 2 references. You can ask for more. We want at least one of those references to be professional in nature. It doesn't have to be your current job. It can be a past job. But we want one to be professional in nature. That's the only requirement that we have around it. But here's who should I choose? And I'll talk about a big mistake that people make in references. Is to sometimes choose somebody that might have an impressive title. But the problem with that is maybe that person has not observed you. So, and the worst is when you get a reference where there's actually no context in it. And so my advice is choose those references that can speak best about your character and abilities. That's the first piece of advice. The second is the best that you can align, as I talk about those accomplishments and impact, and you can align your references to that work experience that you want to highlight in your application. That's the second piece of advice. So some practical things, really important that you meet with your referee. You explain why you want to do the MBA, provide them with a deadline. Each school is different, but what we do is you have to send your references before you can submit your application. But you can submit your application before we receive the references. We like to receive them in about 10 days, and that allows you to go to interview stage and, allows us, we need the references for the final review of the admissions committee. So again, completed reference forms can arrive after the submission deadline. I'm going to talk about previous academic experience. So, we look at the last 2 years of your most recent degree when we calculate the entrance or a GPA or average. But here's the key thing. We don't have a minimum GPA. Class average comes into B, or, anywhere from 75 to 78 is the average, but there's a wide range within that average. And the reason why we don't have a minimum GPA is, what are we looking for in your previous academic experience? We're looking for that you have the academic ability to do the program. And another way to showcase that is a GMAT or GRE. And so, I can speak from my experience. Another one, the reason that I delayed it is I had not great grades for my undergraduate degree, to be quite honest. I did a history degree, was something I enjoyed in high school, didn't enjoy it as much in university as well. I was a first generation person, actually the first and only person in my family to attend university. So I had to work when I went to university. And I worked and I did social stuff. And so the time that I worked came out of my schoolwork. So I did not do well. But, it's not really a function of my academic ability. It's more of my maturity level at the time, but also where I chose to spend my time. So I had to write a stronger GMAT score. And so, at least our average or better than our average to compensate for the GPA, which quite frankly was in the 60s. So again, key thing is no minimum GPA. The lower you are in the GPA, you can showcase that with higher GMAT or GRE. We also look at program of study, and I'll describe this. I had a history degree. So, I didn't do math after grade 10. So they're going to, the admissions committee at the time looked further into my quantitative abilities on the GMAT and GRE score. I did the GMAT, but we're going to look more, if that's the case with you, at the quantitative aspect of it, maybe less the verbal side. Conversely, if somebody's graduated with a degree, a STEMS degree, we're not going to look as much at the quantitative stuff. We're going to look more at the verbal side of things. So that's just talking about how we look at previous academic experience. But the key thing is we look at it in combination with the GMAT or GRE. I'm going to talk about essays. You're going to find in every application, you're going to have at least written essays. But a lot of schools use video essays as well. And we do that, and I'm going to talk about that. But let me take some tips about written essays. The key thing is you want to make sure you answer the question. And the second bullet point about proofread it to give to somebody else, I'm going to give you a tip on how to make sure you answer the question. When you give your essay questions, answers to somebody to proofread, don't give them the question, just give them the answer. And then as they're proofreading it, ask them, what do you think the question is? Here's the other thing. I never am a fan of calling it essays. Essays mean something formal. The reality is that the essay should reflect you, should reflect your personality. And the best way to do that is keep it conversational. Think about writing the essays for an audience of one. That's how admissions committees read them, is they read it for an audience of one. They read them individually. So, don't be afraid to kind of, bring out your personality in the applications and also your voice. A couple of mistakes that people make. I think the first is people get stressed out. I will say, I just came back from Lagos, Nigeria last week, where I met with probably, individually 40 to 50 applicants. And for the large majority, a lot of them are nervous about the essays. And I say to them, I said, look, the essays can be, because people, there's a word limit in it. And I don't know where, but here's what the essays are designed to do. And I'm going to use an analogy because I'm a big believer in analogy. It's a trailer to the movie. So if you're looking to watch a movie on Netflix, you click on the trailer and maybe, it's 2 minutes for a 2-hour movie. Think about the essays as the trailer for you, and think about your interview as the movie. You're going to have an opportunity to explain further in the interview. So here's the other thing. Be clear, be concise, be creative, but most importantly, be yourself. Here's another mistake that people make in the essays is they write them because they think here's an answer that you think that they want to hear. And the problem with that is that as you go to the interview stage and the interviewer is starting to probe into what you've written in your essays, if it's not a true experience for you, and then your story is going to collapse and the interview is not going to go well. So really important to be yourself in the essays. Video essays. So we ask for video essays. How it works is you log into a system called Kira, which many business schools use. We have a bank of 50 questions. You will randomly be selected to give 2 questions. These are something you can't prepare ahead of time. You will have, like, the question is read to you via video. Myself or a colleague, Lindsay, will show up on your screen and we'll read the question to you. You'll have about 30 seconds to craft a response and then a minute to 2 minutes to give your response. I always say give yourself 30 minutes, right? So think about finding a quiet space, kind of sit back, kind of get ready for it. You have the opportunity to test the technology ahead of time. Dress professionally. Being nervous is normal. We're asking you to think on your feet. But the key thing about this is all about getting acquainted questions. This is nothing about technical or anything else. We're just going to ask you some getting acquainted questions. It's about allowing you to bring more of your personality into the application. And then there's no right answer. So again, it's getting acquainted questions. So that's a key thing about the video essays. Talk about the interview. You know, an interview to the MBA program is no different than an interview when you go for a job. And so, you know, who does our interviews is actually members of our career management team. It's not admissions and recruitment staff, and we're unique that way. And so it's with members of our career management team. These are the coaches that are going to work with you in the program. And the reason we want to involve them into the interview process is we want to make sure that this is about fit for you. We want to understand your career goals, understand your background more, and whether or not we feel confident when you come into the program that you're going to be successful on the way out career-wise. And the best people to do that is the career coaches that are working with you in the program. It also allows them to get to know you before the program, get to know your experience. But some standard interview tips, you know, part of interviewing is storytelling. And actually, part of an interview, I'd say all of it is about storytelling. So you want to be prepared of the stories that you want to share, but you don't want to be scripted. It's totally fine to have some bullet points down, but what you don't want to be doing is obvious that you're reading it. You want to be yourself. And it goes back to the interviews. Is rarely when they do an interview and ask you a question that they move on to the next question. They're going to take that question. They're going to probe further in it. So again, if it's not a meaningful experience, that story is going to collapse. It's important to do your research into the program. Practice. You know, pick a family, family member or friend and practice storytelling with them. And that helps build your confidence. That preparation is really important. And then make sure at the end that you have some intelligent questions to ask your interviewer. And one of the things you do is when we apply, we have a lot of materials to help you, you know, what can you expect in the interview, how to prep for the interview, because we want you to put your best foot forward. Some final thoughts, and Sergey, after this, I'm happy to stick around if anybody has any questions. Some advice. Really important you connect with each school before your application is submitted. We're here to help. And the best thing is when we go to an admissions committee and we've known the candidate through the application process. We are here to help you. We're here to help you put your best foot forward. Get to know the culture of each school. Attend events, visit the school if you can, talk to alumni, talk to current students. We will help you connect with them. But that's really important when you think about what matters most to you. Think about what matters most to you in the culture. Align your application submissions. So as you're applying to multiple schools, make sure you apply around the same time, but also keep the schools informed. One of the things that is the biggest thing we recommend is you want to have all your options in front of you before you have to make a final decision. And the best way to do that is align your application submission, but also keep in touch with schools. We'll have candidates come to us and say, you know what, I know I have a deadline next week to do my offer, but I'm waiting for a few more schools. Can you extend my offer? Not a problem. Sometimes it's the opposite, where somebody says, I've heard from other schools, I need to get my application answer from you as quick as possible. We will help expedite that. And the last one's be thoughtful about your final decision. It is lifelong. I'm going to end with this quote. I think this quote is I really love what I do. And the reason what I love about my do is I talk about being in the dream business. And what I love is I love meeting students before they come in, candidates before they start the MBA program. I look forward to following them through the MBA program, but more importantly, I look forward to following them afterwards. And I can tell you that this is a transformational experience doing an MBA. You will not be the same person, both personally and professionally on the way out. And again, this quote really covers it. You are always one decision away from a totally different life. And I will tell you one thing, you have a totally different life after doing an MBA program. So here's a couple things. I'll leave this on this slide, but happy to take any questions. Some next steps with us. One of the things we do is you're welcome to send in your resume or LinkedIn profile for preliminary assessment. It allows us to get to know your experience, allows us to say, hey, look, you should apply. Like when we see on paper, you should go through the application process. And again, we're not making application decisions. So send in the resume or LinkedIn profile you have. If there's any gaps, we'll reach out to you. We have tons of webinars and podcasts, some really great content there. We have events both online and in person, and then of course the application submission. But Sergey, happy to take any questions at all.
Thank you so much, JD, for sharing all of this. If anybody has any questions, please put them in a Q&A box or in a chat box. I just wanted to echo what JD was saying as well. I've done this for a while, for many years, and I can tell you many of our clients would go to top schools such as Ivey, and almost everybody told me that this was the best decision they've ever made. And the rest of the people just usually said it was a really good decision. So many people do actually say this. I remember one of the gentlemen, he graduated and he became my personal friend as well, got a really good job. And he's like, wow, this was the best decision I've ever made in my life. Oh, okay, wow, that's good. Hopefully you can make lots of more really great decisions now that you have an MBA. But it's certainly a very, very life-changing experience. For me, it was a life-changing experience. I tripled my salary. I expanded my options so much, and I'm doing this work now because I have an MBA, and at some point I've done my MBA. So it's certainly something that I recommend if you are the kind of person who is naturally a leader or you want to be a leader, then doing an MBA might be a good option. So certainly, please reach out. We are here to help. JD, I really appreciate. I mean, JD is a gentleman who's been doing this for a long time. He has a big team that's reporting to him. He's very busy traveling, and yet he finds time every month to come here for half an hour and meet with us. So I'm really
Always
grateful
happy to do that. So
that you do this and
yeah.
share this with us. Tomorrow we're going to send everybody an email, and we'll include our contact information, JD's contact information. I would really like to encourage you to get in touch. So a couple people were asking here, do we cover, so there are a couple questions about our course. So do we cover everything? Yes, we do. Of course, half of our course is quant and half of our course is the rest. Just today's class is all about quant. But for example, if you come on August 2nd, we're going to just talk about verbal. We're not going to talk about quant at all. So of course, normally 6 weeks. Yes, so in Toronto, if you are in Toronto, we do offer an in-person class. And I'm one of the instructors. So I actually live very close to Toronto. Yes, so if you go on admitmaster.com/offer, you can see some offers. And most importantly, get in touch with me and I'm going to help you out. I want to make sure you pick the right program. I want to ask you, maybe JD, one question. And
sure.
if you don't know how, if you don't have the answer, then you don't need to answer. But how are you going to accept, or what's the new GMAT focus going to mean for the application comparing different students? Is that going to be relatively straightforward?
Pretty straightforward. I mean, the team was down at the GMAT conference. That GMAT's done a great job of kind of prepping the schools on it. I think the GMAT test has not been adjusted for many years, as you know, Sergey. And I think, I think the changes are really, really good. I think it's going to open up accessibility around it. So, we're going to accept both. As very common in schools that, a test score is good for 5 years. So if somebody writes the GMAT that's out there currently, and 5 years later they decide to apply, we're going to accept it. So anyways, that's how we're viewing it. I think that's pretty standard across all schools, that they're going to accept both of them. So they're both measuring the same things. They're just going about it a different way. You're probably much more knowledgeable about it than I am around it, because you're preparing around the prep on it. But for us, we're going to accept both of them. So
thank you. Yes, one interesting thing is that the new GMAT is going to focus a lot more on the logic and reasoning skills, and a little bit less on, for example, knowing hard math. So I totally agree.
Which is smart, because I mean, it was at one time, if you needed to cover average, weighted average cost of capital, you had to do it by hand in a calculator. Now you're doing it in Excel, right? So there's much more logic involved in Excel than there is actually the hard math. The system does the hard math for you.
Exactly. And now with the chat GPT and then with everything, there's so many things
Yeah.
automated. Then most important thing is to be able to make good decisions, right? And think rationally.
Exactly. Yeah.
And some here asked the question, so the Harvard Business School said they're not going to accept the GMAT focus for this year. Well, it's just going to be for this year. So some of the schools said this. Usually if they have very early deadlines for Harvard, for example, their final deadlines in January. So they just said, we don't want to deal with it. Everybody does the previous
right.
GMAT.
Yeah. A lot of that's, you know, Sergey, you mentioned it, is the timing of the application deadlines. So yeah,
exactly. Okay, perfect.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much again.
See you, Sergey.
See you next month. And everyone, will see you at our verbal refresher class.
Take care. Thanks, Sergey, again. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, JD.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining us. And everyone, thanks again for joining. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Please look for an email tomorrow with special offers, resources, and a few things that are going to help you prepare for the GMAT. And above all, oh, thank you. Somebody said brilliant webinar. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure to co-host this with JD. Just always such a wealth of resources. So thanks so much, everyone, and please keep in touch. Please get in touch with us, and we are certainly here to help. Our job is to help you make the best decisions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sergey. Take care. Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Good night. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Please reach out. If you mentioned that you wanted to talk, I will reach out to you. We'll set up some time, and I'm just going to try to help as much as I possibly can. If you haven't said it yet, then please just reach out to me. You can respond back to my email that I'm going to send to you tomorrow. So I'll try to get it out sometime tomorrow morning. I'll include the recording of this seminar as well. It should be available very shortly. So you can refer back to it. Hopefully use some of these strategies, take a practice test, let's chat. Please tell your friends if you have any friends who you think also would like to have some GMAT strategies or learn some new strategies. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all the best in your application. I would say we all agree that our world needs leaders and good leaders. There's lots of problems in this world. And guess what? When the pandemic started, a lot of the consultants from top consulting firms with MBA degrees were actually figuring things out, all the logistics and a lot of other things in healthcare. A lot is actually done by MBA. So MBA is a universal degree. It's a very general, and it teaches you a lot of very useful skills. Of course, you will be a manager, you will be a leader, and if this is what you would like to do, then this is a very good route. If you'd like to chat a little bit more about your personal story and send me your resume and just talk a little bit more about your application and why MBA, why now, and why you're a good fit and things like that, and what you can potentially do after an MBA, I'm happy to do that as well. We at AdmitMaster, we have a team of coaches who can help you actually prepare an application, train you for the resume. One of the people who, for example, used to be an interviewer at Ivey, one of the top interviewers, now works with us as our trainer for people like you who will be ready for an interview. So we can certainly support you all throughout the process. The most important thing is for you to decide what is it that you would want to do, what's best for you. And if we can help you, then that would be really something that will make my day. So please reach out. I do a lot of one-on-one consultations. Send me your resume. You can book the time on our website, admitmaster.com, and we can chat. So thanks so much. Have a good night. Thanks again for joining. Take care. We'll see you soon. And see you on August 2nd at our verbal refresher class.